Hi, I'm Aruna Rangachar Pohl. I'm from India Foundation for Humanistic Development. We're a non-profit based out of Bangalore, but working pan-India primarily on sustainable agriculture and biodiversity conservation as well as rural livelihoods. In this context, I'm also a member of the board of Revitalising Rainfed Agriculture Network. The market systems that support farming or the other ecosystem supports like finance for farming, agriculture practices, market support, market systems that kind of say buyer linkages, the logistics, etc., started moving away from these small localized farm production market kind of connect to a more distant markets, distant buyers, trucking long distances, and then the fragmentation began because when you have a small lot, the farmers don't have access to a big buyer. The big buyer is not interested, right? So what happens? A middleman comes in or a local youth comes in. So thereby layer to layer, we started getting about 7 to 8 steps in the supply chain before a small farmer's produce reaches a level of market, and accordingly the inefficiencies increased, accordingly the exploitation increased, because there was this black box for the small farmer, not having visibility in terms of what happens at the buying end, and the buyer in turn also not having much visibility as to what happens at the small farmer's end. So because of that kind of a fragmentation and delineation in terms of supply chains, the small farmers or rain-fed farmers continued to get more and more underserved as a category. So the policy bias, like I said, is kind of started veering more and more towards the large farmers, and that way again rain-fed farmers got excluded from accessing all of that support that was meant for them, to which they really did not have the need or the access. So again, when we come to the produce that rain-fed farming systems contribute to our country, in a sense, I think when you talk about the nutrition basket of this country, it rests in the hands of rain-fed farmers. I think the numbers you will get from any public domain, but it's like 80+% of say millets, which are nutrition power foods, or if you talk of oilseeds, or if you talk of other kind of cereals, maize, etc., all of this come from rain-fed farmers, and that's a huge. It may be small parcels of land, highly fragmented, where rain-fed farming is practiced, but if you look at the kind of production contribution they give towards a country, it is a very important and a very significant contribution. And you compare that with the percentage of agriculture subsidy that actually reaches them, it is highly tilted against them. So that needs a policy correct on an urgent basis and an immediate basis. And now with the new rain-fed agriculture agenda, that with the National Rainfed Authority that is in place, hopefully a lot of that will come in. They're all calling it the new green revolution, which is favoring rain-fed farmers, as well as favoring looking at agro-ecological principles of farming. That brings us to the point of climate change and how that impact of climate change has been hard faced primarily by rain-fed farmers because of their rain dependence and their whole approach to farming. The produce that is there, which you talk about, say millets, or you talk about any of the other maize or any of the other kind of produce that comes from rain-fed farmers, though they form 80% maybe of the volume, but they are small lots by individuals. So it's essentially, again, there is a lot of diversity. It is not like one standard quality or one standard type of seed. So there is a lot of difference, but these are natural products. What the market seeks, and that has happened over a period of time, the market seeks is something that's uniform. that is something that is at scale. And so scale and uniformity are some things that rain-fed agriculture farmers struggle to compete on. We looked at this anomaly and then we've decided to come up with so the way the RRAN works is with the network of partners, with the network of experts, etc. We work on core thematic areas, and these core thematic areas, 11 core thematic areas, are then anchored under one working group, and that working group then takes the lead in terms of putting together the agenda, the objectives for that particular theme, as well as puts together a level of expertise from across the country to see how one can build that evidence path from practice to policy. And that then helps the government to kind of take maybe an appropriate shift towards having policies that support rain-fed farmers. IFHD has been part of the markets and institutions working group, and this working group basically has worked with three objectives. It's put together a group of about 8 people, and then all the associate organizations that back those 8 people, and they essentially work on looking at current market systems and how rain-fed farmers struggle to compete in those current market systems. What are the challenges, what are the issues, what could possibly be the way forward in terms of a policy that could help address those challenges. The second thing is in terms of institution framework, or institutions that create a supportive framework or a supportive ecosystem which would help rain-fed farmers to better able to compete in the mainstream markets or with mainstream agriculture produce. For that, you're talking about ecosystem players, could be finance, which is a very critical need. You have other logistics, you have market, the smaller markets and how they can connect to the larger markets. You could have storage or infrastructure related issues that small farmers could benefit from. So these are the kind of institutional ecosystem providers that could help, and that is being identified and worked upon in terms of a policy paper by the Markets and Working Institutions Group. So finance is one of those key elements, as well as what we also talk about is say certain government institutions, government support systems, say the matter of minimum support price, MSP, what the procurement that government undertakes and how those procurement policies work against rain-fed farmers and why more rain-fed farmers are not able to access that. Also looking at markets in terms of consumers and how aware is there a need to kind of give that categorization to rain-fed produce so that consumers are also aware of what happens in terms of rain-fed agriculture. So whether there is a scope or a need for that kind of segmentation or categorization for rain-fed produce, as well as looking at issues of technology and technology upgradations, looking at livestock and the role of livestock and how this can be revived or made in a manner that is more modern and accessible to rain-fed farmers. When we talk about institutional frameworks and what supports small farmers, and when I say small farmers, de facto rain-fed farmers. So rain-fed farmers basically, when you look at their kind of challenges in terms of small lots, diversity of produce, distance from markets, ability to cater to customer demands in terms of uniformity, in terms of value addition, all of these key challenges in a way can be addressed through the institutional frameworks of farmer-producer companies or farmer-producer organizations. And IFHD has been working on FPOs and farmer-producer organizations incubation or providing them with business incubation support for now about 9 years or so. Much before it was the policy or the government kind of a push to promote FPOs. And here in this context, rain-fed FPOs then they have a different ethos compared to the larger single commodity, one product, one district kind of approach. So when you talk of again FPOs whose membership primarily consists of rain-fed farmers, the issues of diversity, the issues of multiple crops, multiple kind of activities, multiple needs for value chain development, multiple needs for different kinds of logistic requirements for different crops, all of those things come up, which an FPO then has to address. So FPO, coming back, is basically a legal entity that aggregates farmers, and farmers are then become shareholders or owners of that farmer producer company. On an average, you would have anywhere between 500 farmers to about 1,000 farmers who become members of these FPOs. Unlike a cooperative, an FPC is basically a company under the Registrar of Companies Act and falls under as a corporate body where a lot of the legal and statutory requirements for an FPC is as applicable as it is to any other business or a company. So farmers then have to kind of have a board of directors, and then it kind of follows a professional management structure with a CEO, accountant, sales and marketing, and all of these kind of divisions. Now, what this particular institutional legal entity does is addresses this issue of scale as far as markets are concerned. So a small farmer becomes a member of an FPC within taluka or a village or a cluster, if you can just generally call it a cluster, and then is able to access at an aggregate. What the FPC does is, it's whatever the needs of the small farmers are, it is able to aggregate and engage with market systems or ecosystem players to do it at a scale. So suppose each farmer needs 1 bag, 2 bags of whatever urea or seeds or whatever it is, rather than each farmer going to the marketplace and buying and having that kind of dependent relationship with the trader or the middleman, the FPC takes the part of aggregating the needs of all of these farmers and then supplying it at a fair and transparent way. Similarly, small farmers don't have access to equipment or cannot afford to buy equipments that support their agriculture practice. So the FPC buys equipment and runs it as what they call custom hire center. So the farmer can hire a tractor or a trolley to take his produce to the markets for an hour, for 2 hours, and just pay the service cost of that. And that is then a viable business model for the farmer FPC. Inputs also, again, where traders possibly keep a larger margin, the FPC is able to talk to distributor or directly to the fertilizer company, saying that from my 1,000 farmers, an aggregated need is for this much of fertilizer. So is able to get a better rate, and that margin again is a lower margin that they would retain and then pass on that with a little bit of a service cost to the farmers, and they will get it in a timely manner. As and when they need it. The third aspect is the aggregation of output. The FPC would know what each farmer is producing, how much he's producing, and at what time that produce is going to be available for harvest, right? With that kind of a knowledge and that kind of data and visibility to their farmer members, the FPC for 1,000 farmers on an average of about 2.5 to 3 acres of land, that is a sizable parcel of land for the produce to get aggregated. So there comes the service that an FPC can perform in terms of aggregating produce and selling it to big buyers. So there's the market visibility that a small farmer can get through. So since the idea is that farmers own their own company and are able to manage their own company. Appeals to address the kind of anomalies that exist for rain-fed farmers to access markets, to access ecosystem services. But also it requires a good amount of strengthening to happen before that actually takes shape. And before the farmers who essentially did just their job of producing something and going and handing it to the nearest, sometimes even at his farm step, someone would come and pick up the produce and go away, right? From that level, to be getting farmers to own a company, do all the legal and statutory compliances on time, deal with mainstream buyers and sellers in terms of inputs or outputs, and be able to play the game. What an agri-business like ITC does with multi-billions and huge infrastructure and a huge army of people, staff and other support system, as well as, of course, the thing that makes every business run, money, access to huge money. None of this is as such easily available to an FPC as of now. So there needs to be a whole support system that needs to be put in place. So capacity building of these farmers who have now become board of directors, so they have to run a company. So capacity building is required. Handholding for the staff of these FPCs who are generally local youth, right? They need to be handheld through so they can become efficient business managers. And then you need to have the FPC able to negotiate the various needs of inputs, equipment or outputs for their farmers. And then they need those market linkages. Now they have 1,000 acres of produce aggregated. Where do they keep it? How do they store it? What is the value addition they need to do? Okay, how do they improve shelf life of that produce? All of those things require a huge amount of capacity building and a huge amount of support. And until and unless these things fall in place, or over a period of take time to learn and do all of these things, it is very important that policy supports that. Government policies give them that little bubble while they build their own abilities to be able to deal. And that is where possibly some amount of changes need to happen from current laws or new laws that are being framed. Make sure that the small farmer who's part of an FPO is now in a position to take up his responsibilities and his role, his rightful role in that kind of new world. And that's especially important for rain-fed farmers, because rain-fed farmers are typically characterized by small produce, small lots grown in dry land or semi-arid kind of conditions. Like I said earlier, hard-facing climate change, so they need that additional level of knowledge support as well as capacity building support.